The diner's neon sign flickered, casting a red glow over the rain-slicked pavement of Brooklyn's 7th Avenue. Inside, Jamie Navarro balanced a tray of steaming coffee mugs with his good hand, his left wrist throbbing beneath a tightly wrapped bandage he prayed no one would notice. Every step was a gamble, every smile a lie, but the 24-year-old waiter couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now, not ever. The bell above the door chimed, and Ethan Caldwell stepped in, shaking rain from his leather jacket. To the staff, he was just another regular, a quiet guy with sharp green eyes who tipped well and always ordered black coffee with a side of pancakes. But Ethan was no ordinary customer. He was the diner's owner, working undercover to see why his family's legacy, Rosie's Diner, was bleeding money despite packed tables. Tonight, though, his eyes weren't on the cash register. They were on Jamie, whose forced grin didn't quite reach his eyes. Jamie weaved through the crowded diner, dodging a toddler's flailing arms and a tipsy couple arguing over fries. His heart raced as he set the tray down, pain shooting through his wrist. He'd broken it 2 weeks ago, a stupid accident involving a late-night stumble on his apartment stairs, but he couldn't afford a doctor. No insurance, no savings, just a dream of saving enough to escape this city and the memories it held. He adjusted the bandage under his sleeve, hoping it would hold through the shift. Ethan watched from his corner booth, nursing his coffee. He'd noticed Jamie's wince, the way he favored his right hand, the subtle tremor when he lifted anything heavier than a plate. Something was wrong, and Ethan's gut told him it wasn't just a sprain. He'd spent weeks observing his staff, trying to pinpoint the source of the diner's financial troubles. Missing inventory, shorted registers, even whispers of a side hustle among the cooks. But Jamie was different. He worked harder than anyone, stayed late to scrub counters, and never complained, even when customers snapped at him. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the kid was hiding something bigger than a bad day. "Order up," called Maria, the head cook, sliding a plate of burgers across the pass. Jamie grabbed it, biting his lip as his wrist screamed in protest. He set the plate down at table 5, flashing a smile at the family there, but his vision blurred for a moment. He steadied himself against the counter, praying no one saw. Across the room, Ethan's eyes narrowed. He'd seen enough. The diner was a microcosm of Brooklyn, gruff locals, hipsters chasing nostalgia, and immigrants like Jamie, who'd come from Chicago with nothing but a backpack and a hope for something better. He'd landed at Rosie's 6 months ago, grateful for the job, but haunted by the life he'd left behind. Back in Chicago, he'd been outed to his conservative family, who'd called his love for men a sin and thrown him out. The memory still burned, but he'd built a fragile new life here, one he couldn't let crumble because of a stupid injury. Ethan, meanwhile, was wrestling his own demons. At 32, he'd inherited Rosie's from his late father, a man who'd built the diner with love but left it in chaos. Ethan had spent his life hiding his own truth, that he was gay, that he'd loved and lost a man years ago, that he'd buried that part of himself to keep the family business afloat. Coming back to Brooklyn meant facing those ghosts, and watching Jamie was like seeing a younger version of himself, someone fighting to survive in a world that didn't always make room for them. As the night wore on, the diner buzzed with chaos. A spilled milkshake, a shouting match between 2 regulars, a busboy calling out sick. Jamie pushed through, his wrist aching but his tips piling up. He needed every dollar for rent, for the dream of a fresh start somewhere far from the past. Ethan watched, his instincts screaming that Jamie's pain ran deeper than physical. He scribbled a note on his napkin, checked Jamie's schedule, talked to him. He didn't know why it felt so urgent, but he couldn't ignore it. By 10 p.m., the crowd thinned, and Jamie finally took a break, slumping in the back alley with a cigarette he didn't smoke, just held for comfort. The cold bit at his fingers, and he flexed his injured hand, wincing as the pain flared. He didn't hear Ethan approach until the older man's voice cut through the quiet. "You okay, kid?" Ethan asked, leaning against the brick wall, his breath visible in the chilly air. Jamie startled, shoving his hand in his pocket. "Yeah, fine. Just needed a breather." His voice was too quick, too defensive. Ethan's gaze lingered, seeing the bandage peeking out from Jamie's sleeve. "That doesn't look fine," Ethan said, nodding at the wrist. Jamie's heart sank. He couldn't afford questions, not when he was already skating on thin ice with bills and secrets. "Look, it's nothing," Jamie said, forcing a laugh. "Just tweaked it. I'm good to work." Ethan didn't buy it, but he didn't push, not yet. Instead, he handed Jamie a fresh coffee, their fingers brushing for a moment. The contact sent a jolt through Jamie, unexpected and warm, and he looked away, his cheeks flushing. Ethan felt it too, a spark he hadn't felt in years, but he buried it fast. He was here to save the diner, not complicate things. Back inside, the night wound down, but the tension between them lingered. Ethan stayed late, pretending to read a newspaper while watching Jamie close up. The kid was good, too good, maybe, for a place like this. Ethan's mind churned with questions. Why was Jamie hiding the injury? What else was he hiding? And why did Ethan care so much? As Jamie locked the front door, their eyes met across the empty diner, and for a moment, the world felt smaller, quieter, like it was just the two of them. The next evening, Rosie's diner hummed with its usual chaos, but Jamie's world felt like it was tilting. His wrist was worse, the pain a constant throb that made every tray feel like a boulder. He'd popped painkillers from a corner store, but they barely dulled the ache. Still, he smiled, took orders, and dodged questions from co-workers like Maria, who'd noticed his sluggish pace. "You look like hell, Mijo," she said, tossing him a concerned glance. Jamie waved it off, but his heart pounded. He couldn't let anyone know, not when rent was due and his roommate was already threatening to kick him out. Ethan was back in his booth, his undercover routine now a habit. He'd spent the day digging into the diner's books, finding discrepancies that pointed to someone skimming cash, small amounts, but enough to hurt. His suspects were the usual culprits, a shady supplier, a cook with a gambling habit, maybe even the manager, Carla, who always seemed too slick with excuses. But his focus kept drifting to Jamie. The kid was a puzzle, one Ethan couldn't stop trying to solve. He'd checked Jamie's file. No emergency contact, no insurance, just a Chicago address crossed out. It didn't add up. Tonight, Jamie was struggling. A rowdy group of frat boys at table 8 kept him running, demanding refills and extra napkins, their laughter grating on his nerves. He dropped a glass, the shatter drawing every eye in the diner. Sorry, he muttered, sweeping up the shards with his good hand. His bandage slipped, revealing bruised, swollen skin, and he yanked his sleeve down, heart racing. Ethan saw it all from his booth, his jaw tightening. That wasn't a tweak, it was serious. "Need a hand," Ethan called, standing before Jamie could protest. He grabbed a broom, helping clean the mess, their shoulders brushing in the tight space. Jamie's breath hitched, and he mumbled a thanks, avoiding Ethan's eyes. Up close, Ethan could see the exhaustion etched into Jamie's face, the faint shadows under his eyes. "You sure you're okay?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice low. Jamie nodded, too quickly, and hurried back to the counter. Ethan watched him go, a mix of frustration and concern twisting in his chest. He wasn't just here to play detective anymore. Something about Jamie felt personal. As the night wore on, Ethan overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Two cooks, whispering in the kitchen, mentioned Jamie's name alongside side gig and cash under the table. Ethan's mind raced. Was Jamie involved in the diner's missing money? It didn't fit. The kid worked too hard, cared too much. But doubt not at him. He decided to test it. When Jamie brought his check, Ethan slipped an extra $20 into the tip, watching closely. Jamie pocketed it without a second glance, his face unreadable. Ethan's heart sank, but he wasn't ready to judge, not yet. Jamie, oblivious to Ethan's suspicions, was fighting his own battles. His roommate, Derek, had texted him an ultimatum: pay the overdue rent by tomorrow or get out. Jamie had $200 saved, nowhere near enough. The diner's tips were good, but not enough to cover a hospital bill and rent. He'd considered pawning his late mother's ring, the only thing he had left of her, but the thought made him sick. Instead, he pushed through the pain, serving tables with a smile that felt like a mask. At midnight, the diner quieted, and Jamie took his break in the alley again, this time without the cigarette. He leaned against the wall, flexing his injured hand, wincing as the pain flared. Ethan followed, unable to stay away. "You're not fooling anyone," he said, stepping into the dim light. Jamie froze, his eyes wide. "What?" he asked, voice sharp. Ethan pointed at the bandage. "That's not a tweak. You need a doctor." Jamie's laugh was bitter. "Yeah? With what money? You think I'm here for fun?" Ethan hesitated, then pulled out his wallet. "Let me help. I can cover a clinic visit." Jamie's eyes narrowed, pride and suspicion warring in his chest. "Why do you care? You're just a customer." Ethan's jaw worked, but he didn't answer. How could he say he wasn't just a customer, that he saw too much of himself in Jamie's struggle? Instead, he said, "Because someone should." The moment hung between them, charged and fragile. Jamie looked away, his throat tight. No one had offered to help him since Chicago, since the family that had disowned him for who he loved. He wanted to say yes, to lean into Ethan's kindness, but fear held him back. What if Ethan expected something in return? What if this was a trap? "I'm fine," he said finally, pushing past Ethan to head back inside. Ethan watched him go, his heart heavy. He didn't know Jamie's story, but he was determined to find out. Inside, Carla, the manager, caught Ethan's eye. She'd been watching him, too, her suspicions growing about the regular, who asked too many questions. She cornered him as he paid his bill. "You're here a lot, Ethan. Something I should know." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. Ethan smiled, deflecting. "Just love the pancakes." But as he left, he felt the weight of her gaze. The diner was a house of secrets, and he was getting closer to unraveling them, starting with Jamie. The rain had stopped, but the air in Brooklyn hung heavy with humidity, matching the tension in Rosie's diner. Jamie moved through his shift like a ghost, his wrist now a constant fire that no amount of willpower could ignore. He'd taped it tighter, but every tray he lifted felt like a betrayal of his body. He avoided Ethan's booth, where the man sat with his coffee, his eyes tracking Jamie's every move. Jamie felt the scrutiny, a mix of warmth and dread. Why was this guy so invested? And why did Jamie's heart skip when their eyes met? Ethan, meanwhile, was piecing together the diner's puzzle. He'd spent the morning with an accountant, confirming the missing money wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping. Someone was stealing, and the trail led back to the staff. He'd ruled out the busboys, too young and too green, but Carla and the cooks were still suspects. Then there was Jamie. Ethan didn't want to believe it, but the overheard conversation nagged at him. He'd started cross-referencing Jamie's shifts with the day's cash went missing. The overlap was too close for comfort. Tonight, the diner was slammed, a local band drawing a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. Jamie was in the weeds, juggling orders and dodging Carla's sharp tongue. She'd been on his case all night, snapping about his slow pace. "Pick it up, Navarro, or you're out," she hissed, her eyes cold. Jamie nodded, swallowing his pride. He needed this job, needed the stability, even if it meant enduring her. But when he dropped another plate, the crash echoing through the diner, Carla's face darkened. "That's coming out of your pay," she barked. Ethan saw it all, his fists clenching under the table. He wanted to intervene, to tell Carla to back off, but blowing his cover now would ruin everything. Instead, he watched Jamie, who cleaned up the mess with shaking hands, his face pale. Ethan couldn't take it anymore. When Jamie passed his booth, Ethan grabbed his arm, gently, but enough to stop him. "You're not okay," he said, voice low. "Stop pretending." Jamie yanked his arm free, his eyes flashing. "You don't know me," he snapped, but the crack in his voice betrayed him. The moment lingered, charged with unspoken truths. Jamie stormed off, but Ethan followed him to the back, where Jamie was splashing cold water on his face in the cramped bathroom. "Talk to me," Ethan said, leaning against the doorframe. "What's going on?" Jamie laughed, a hollow sound. "Why do you care? You're not my boss." Ethan's heart twisted. He was Jamie's boss, but he couldn't say it. Not yet. Instead, he said, "I've been where you are. Hiding. Hurting. You don't have to do it alone." Jamie froze, his eyes meeting Ethan's in the mirror. For a moment, he saw something in Ethan's gaze, understanding, maybe even pain, that mirrored his own. But trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. "I'm fine," he said, brushing past Ethan. The contact sent a shiver through him, a pull he didn't want to name. Ethan felt it too, a dangerous spark that threatened to unravel his focus. He was here to save the diner, not fall for a waiter with secrets. Back in the dining room, the night spiraled. A drunk customer grabbed Jamie's arm, demanding faster service, and Jamie's wrist buckled under the grip. He gasped, pulling away, and the customer laughed, loud and cruel. Ethan was on his feet before he could think, stepping between them. "Back off," he growled, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the room. The customer muttered an apology and slunk away, but Jamie's face burned with humiliation. "I don't need saving," he whispered to Ethan, but his eyes said otherwise. As the diner closed, Ethan lingered, helping Jamie stack chairs. The silence between them was heavy, filled with questions neither dared ask. Jamie's bandage was fraying, the bruise beneath it stark against his skin. Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the bandage. "Let me help," he said, softer this time. Jamie pulled back, but not as fast. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't have an answer, not one he could say out loud. Instead, he said, "Because you're worth it." The words hit Jamie like a punch. No one had called him worth anything since Chicago, since the family that had rejected him. He wanted to believe Ethan, wanted to lean into the warmth of his voice, but fear clawed at him. What if Ethan was playing him? What if this was just pity? He turned away, grabbing his jacket. "I gotta go," he mumbled, fleeing into the night. Ethan stood alone in the empty diner, his mind racing. He was getting too close, too involved. But Jamie's pain, his resilience, his guarded heart, it was all too familiar. Ethan had hidden his own truth for years, burying his love for a man named Lucas who'd left when Ethan chose the diner over their relationship. Watching Jamie was like seeing a second chance, but at what cost? As he locked up, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd confront Jamie. No more secrets. Dawn broke over Brooklyn, painting the diner's windows in soft gold. Jamie hadn't slept, his wrist a pulsing agony that kept him tossing on his lumpy mattress. Derek's ultimatum loomed. Pay the rent today or get out. He'd counted his tips twice. $237, still short. The thought of pawning his mother's ring twisted his gut, but he was out of options. At Rosie's, he arrived early, hoping to pick up an extra shift. The diner was quiet, the calm before the breakfast rush, but his heart was a storm. Ethan was already there, sitting in his booth, his coffee untouched. He'd spent the night digging deeper into the diner's books, and the numbers didn't lie. Someone was skimming, and Jamie's shifts aligned with too many discrepancies. But his gut screamed Jamie wasn't the thief. The kid's pain, his quiet strength, didn't fit the profile of a crook. Ethan had another plan. Confront Jamie, get the truth, and maybe, just maybe, help him. When Jamie emerged from the kitchen, his bandage was fresh, but his face was drawn. Ethan waved him over, his voice gentle but firm. We need to talk. Jamie's stomach dropped. He sat, his good hand fidgeting. What's this about? He asked, his tone wary. Ethan leaned forward, keeping his voice low. Your hand. Your shifts. I know you're hiding something, Jamie. Let me in. Jamie's eyes widened, fear flashing across his face. Did Ethan know about Chicago? About the money he'd borrowed to survive? I don't know what you mean, Jamie said, his voice tight. Ethan sighed, pulling out a folded piece of paper, a printout of the diner's shift logs, with Jamie's name circled. Money's going missing, and your shifts match up. If it's not you, tell me what's going on. Jamie's heart stopped. He wasn't stealing, but he knew who might be. Carla had been taking tips from the register, claiming it was for supplies, but Jamie had seen her pocket cash. He'd kept quiet, too scared of losing his job to speak up. I'm not a thief, Jamie said, his voice shaking. I swear. Ethan believed him, saw the truth in his eyes, but he needed more. Then what's the deal with your hand? Why won't you get it fixed? Jamie's jaw clenched, and for a moment, he almost told Ethan everything. The fall, the bills, the family that had disowned him for being gay. But shame stopped him. It's my problem, he said, standing. Not yours. Ethan grabbed his wrist, gently, but Jamie flinched, pain shooting through him. Ethan's eyes softened. I'm not the enemy, Jamie. I want to help. The sincerity in his voice cracked something in Jamie's walls. He sat back down, his breath uneven. I can't afford a doctor, he admitted, voice barely audible. I can't lose this job. It's all I've got. Ethan's heart ached. He knew that desperation, had lived it when he'd lost Lucas and buried himself in the diner. Before Ethan could respond, Carla burst in, her eyes narrowing at the sight of them. Navarro, you're on tables, not chit-chat, she snapped. Jamie jumped up, but Ethan stood too, his voice cold. He's taking a break, Carla. Back off. The manager's eyes flicked between them, suspicion hardening her face. She stormed off, but Ethan knew she was trouble. He turned to Jamie. Meet me after your shift. We're getting that hand looked at. Jamie wanted to argue, but Ethan's tone left no room for debate. The day dragged, each tray heavier than the last. By evening, Jamie was dizzy with pain, his vision spotting. When the diner emptied, Ethan was waiting in the alley, a car idling nearby. Get in, he said, holding the door. Jamie hesitated, then slid into the passenger seat, too tired to fight. The clinic was a blur. X-rays, a doctor's stern lecture, a cast that felt like a lifeline. Ethan paid, waving off Jamie's protests. You'll pay me back by keeping your job, he said, but his eyes said something more. In the car, Jamie finally spoke. Why are you doing this? Really? Ethan gripped the wheel, his own truth bubbling up. Because I've been you. Hiding who I am, thinking I had to do it alone. I was wrong. Jamie's breath caught. Was Ethan saying? He didn't ask, but the air between them shifted, electric and unspoken. Back at the diner, Ethan dropped him off, their eyes locking for a moment too long. Tomorrow, Ethan said. We talk. About everything. Jamie nodded, his heart pounding. As Ethan drove away, Jamie touched the cast, a strange hope flickering in his chest. But inside the diner, Carla was waiting, her arms crossed. You're in deep, Navarro, she said, her voice low. And your friend? He's not who he says he is. Jamie's blood ran cold. What did she know? And what did it mean for him and Ethan? The diner's lights buzzed faintly, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in Jamie's chest. Carla's words echoed in his mind. He's not who he says he is. What did she mean? Was Ethan hiding something, just as Jamie had been? The cast on his wrist felt heavy, a reminder of Ethan's kindness, but also a chain tying him to questions he wasn't ready to face. He worked his shift in a daze, avoiding Carla's piercing gaze and Ethan's booth, where the man sat, watching with an intensity that made Jamie's skin prickle. Ethan was done playing games. He'd confirmed Carla was the thief. Her signature was on every falsified supply order, her initials on the shorted registers. He'd called a private meeting with his accountant tomorrow to seal her fate, but Jamie was still the wild card. Ethan needed to know his story, needed to understand why he felt so drawn to him. When Jamie's shift ended, Ethan was waiting in the alley, his leather jacket damp from the evening drizzle. "We're talking now," he said, his voice firm but warm. Jamie hesitated, then nodded, following Ethan to a quiet bench across the street. The city hummed around them, taxis honking, neon signs flickering, but it felt like they were alone. Jamie spoke first, his voice low. "Carla said you're not who you say. What's she talking about?" Ethan's heart skipped. His cover was slipping, but he couldn't lie. Not to Jamie. "I'm the owner," he admitted. "Rosie's is mine. I've been undercover to figure out why we're losing money." Jamie's eyes widened, betrayal flashing across his face. "You lied to me?" "This whole time." Ethan reached for him, but Jamie pulled back. "I had to," Ethan said. "I didn't know who to trust. But I trust you, Jamie. I see you." Jamie's throat tightened. He wanted to be angry, but Ethan's eyes held a raw honesty that disarmed him. "Why me?" he asked, voice breaking. "Why care?" Ethan took a breath, his own walls crumbling. "Because I'm like you. I'm gay. I hid it for years, lost someone I loved, because I was too scared to be myself. I see you fighting, and it kills me to watch you do it alone." Jamie froze, the word gay hanging between them like a bridge. He'd never said it out loud, not here, not after Chicago. But hearing Ethan say it, so steady, so unashamed, cracked something open inside him. "I got kicked out," Jamie whispered, the words spilling out. "My family, back in Chicago, they found out I was gay and threw me out. I came here to start over, but it's been one mess after another. The hand, the rent, everything." Tears stung his eyes, but he didn't stop. "I'm not stealing, Ethan. I swear. But Carla, she's been taking cash. I saw her, but I was too scared to say anything." Ethan's jaw clenched, anger at Carla mixing with relief. He'd been right about Jamie. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his hand finding Jamie's good one. The touch was electric, grounding them both. Jamie didn't pull away this time. Instead, he leaned closer, their shoulders brushing. "I don't know how to trust this," he admitted, but his eyes locked on Ethan's, searching. The next day, Ethan acted. He confronted Carla with the evidence, her face paling as the accountant laid out the numbers. She was fired on the spot, her threats empty against the proof. The staff buzzed with shock, but Jamie felt a weight lift. Ethan pulled him aside after the lunch rush, his voice soft. "I'm promoting you to manager. You've earned it." Jamie blinked, stunned. "Me? I'm nobody." Ethan smiled, his hand brushing Jamie's cheek. "You're everything this place needs." Weeks later, Rosie's diner thrived under Jamie's leadership. The missing money was recovered, the staff rallied, and the neon sign shone brighter. Jamie's cast came off, his wrist healing, but the real change was inside. He and Ethan grew closer, their bond deepening through late-night talks and stolen glances. One evening, as they locked up, Ethan kissed him under the neon glow, a kiss that felt like a promise. Jamie kissed back, his heart full for the first time since Chicago. They weren't fixed, not entirely. Ethan still carried the pain of Lucas, and Jamie bore the scars of rejection. But together, they were building something new, a home in each other and in Rosie's. The diner, once a place of secrets, became a beacon of hope, proof that love could heal what fear had broken. As they walked into the Brooklyn night, hand in hand, Jamie knew he'd found more than a job. He'd found a life worth fighting for.